The last code blue, room 417. It was exactly 3:03 a.m. when the hospital intercom turned on. No static, no warning, just a voice. Cold, flat, mechanical. Code blue, room 417. Every nurse at the station froze because there was one problem. Room 417 didn't exist anymore. I had been working as a respiratory therapist at St. Mary's Hospital for almost a year by then. Long enough to understand one thing about hospitals. They are never truly silent. Even in the middle of the night, there's always noise somewhere. Heart monitors beeping in uneven rhythms, ventilators pushing air into exhausted lungs, phones ringing at the worst possible moments, patients groaning in their sleep, rubber soles squeaking against polished floors. Hospitals breathe, they move, they live. But that night, the building felt dead. Not peaceful, not calm. Dead. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. It was late October, and rain hammered against the windows hard enough to shake them. The storm had knocked out power twice earlier in the evening, forcing the backup generators to kick in. Half the lights in the East Wing still flickered occasionally. Most of the older staff hated working during storms. They said hospitals collected things during bad weather. Pain, fear, death. I never believed any of that. At least, not back then. My shift started at 7 p.m. By 11, the emergency room was packed. Car accidents, chest pain, an overdose, a construction worker with a collapsed lung. Typical Friday night chaos. But around 1:30 a.m., everything slowed down unnaturally fast. Too fast. The ER emptied. Calls stopped coming in. Patients stabilized. Even the trauma pager went quiet. That should have felt like a blessing. Instead, it felt wrong. Like the hospital was waiting for something. At 2:40 a.m., I sat at the nurses' station on the 4th floor, reviewing ventilator settings for 2 ICU patients. Across from me sat Linda Harper, the charge nurse. Linda had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. Nothing rattled her. Not screaming families, not deaths, not violent patients. Nothing. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing tired eyes. "Slow night," she muttered. I looked up immediately. "Don't say that." She smirked. "Come on, you seriously believe saying it out loud causes problems?" "In hospitals?" I replied. "Absolutely." She laughed quietly. "You're becoming superstitious." "You work here long enough," I said, "you start believing weird things." Linda folded her arms. "Like what?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Like how patients always crash right before shift change." "True." Like the hospital was waiting for something. At 2:40 a.m., I sat at the nurses' station on the 4th floor, reviewing ventilator settings for 2 ICU patients. Across from me sat Linda Harper, the charge nurse. Linda had worked at the hospital for over 20 years. Nothing rattled her. Not screaming families, not deaths, not violent patients. Nothing. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing tired eyes. "Slow night," she muttered. I looked up immediately. "Don't say that." She smirked. "Come on, you seriously believe saying it out loud causes problems?" "In hospitals?" I replied. "Absolutely." She laughed quietly. "You're becoming superstitious." "You work here long enough," I said, "you start believing weird things." Linda folded her arms. "Like what?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Like how patients always crash right before shift change." "True."
Or how elevators stop on empty floors? Also true. And how nobody likes going near the old East Wing. Her smile faded slightly. For a second, she didn't respond. Then she looked back at her paperwork. That place should have been demolished years ago. I noticed the change in her tone immediately. "Why?" Linda shook her head. "Forget it." "No, seriously." She sighed. "You ever hear about room 417? The moment she said it, a strange feeling crept into my stomach. Because I had heard the number before. Whispered conversations in break rooms, half-finished stories that stopped when I walked in. Nurses changing the subject the second I asked questions. During my first week at the hospital, one of the night nurses, Caleb, had pulled me aside near the vending machines. "You're new," he'd said quietly, "so listen carefully." I laughed. "What, am I getting initiated?" "I'm serious." He pointed toward the eastern side of the building. "Stay out of the storage corridor near the old East Wing after 3 a.m. "Why?" His expression tightened. "Because that's where room 417 used to be." "Used to be?" I remember laughing nervously. What happened there? But Caleb never answered. He just walked away. Back at the station, thunder shook the windows. Linda stared at the dark hallway ahead. "You know the room was sealed, right?" she said softly. "No. 5 years ago." "What happened?" Before she could answer, click. The overhead intercom activated. Both of us looked up instantly. At first, there was only silence. Then, code blue, room 417. The voice echoed through the floor. Slow, mechanical, emotionless. Not like a normal operator announcement. It sounded distorted, almost underwater. My blood ran cold. Linda stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. What the hell? I couldn't speak, because every instinct in my body screamed the same thing. That voice wasn't live. The intercom crackled once more. Then silence returned. No follow-up. No urgency. No second announcement. Just that one sentence. Code blue, room 417. Linda grabbed the desk phone immediately and dialed downstairs. "ICU station," she snapped when someone answered. "Who called that code blue?" "C's code blues. Always. No exceptions. Even when they don't make sense." Linda grabbed the crash card. "Come on." The East Wing was separated from the active hospital by a long connecting corridor rarely used by staff anymore. Most of the rooms there had been converted into storage years ago. Old equipment, broken beds, archived files. The farther we walked, the colder the air became. Not metaphorically, physically. I could see faint condensation every time I exhaled. "That's weird," I muttered. Linda tightened her jacket. "The heating barely works over here." But something about her voice sounded uncertain. The hallway lights buzzed overhead. Some flickered weakly. Others were completely dead. The wheels of the crash cart squeaked loudly in the silence. No monitors, no voices, no movement. Nothing. It felt like we had stepped out of the hospital and into somewhere abandoned. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed a wheelchair sitting against the wall. Facing us. Empty. One wheel spinning slowly. I stopped walking. "Did you see that?" Linda looked over. "The wheel? It's moving. There's probably a draft." Except there wasn't. The air felt heavy and still. We continued forward. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. Room numbers stopped making sense. Then suddenly, the next door should have been 418, but it wasn't. At the end of the hallway stood a door partially hidden in shadow. A tarnished metal number hung crookedly on the wood. I stopped breathing for a second. Linda whispered, "No!" The room shouldn't have existed. According to the current hospital maps, that space was sealed behind a maintenance wall years ago. Yet there it was. Real. Solid. Waiting. The door was slightly open. A thin darkness spilled from inside. And then, beep. A heart monitor. Slow. Steady. Coming from inside the room. Linda looked at me. "We need to check." Every instinct screamed not to, but we approached anyway. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until my hands actually hurt. Linda pushed the door wider. The hinges groaned softly. Inside, the room looked impossibly old. Not abandoned. Frozen. Like time had stopped 5 years earlier. Old hospital equipment lined the walls. Dust coated everything. An outdated cardiac monitor blinked green beside the bed.
Beep. 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 The rhythm echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. A patient lay beneath a white sheet, motionless. My throat tightened. "Sir?" Linda called carefully. No response. The monitor suddenly sped up. Beep, beep, beep. I stepped closer, slowly. The patient's face remained hidden beneath shadows. Then I noticed something horrifying. The IV bag hanging beside the bed looked ancient. Yellowed. Expired years ago. The plastic tubing was brittle. This room wasn't operating. It couldn't be. Linda moved toward the bedside. "Check responsiveness," she whispered automatically. I reached for the patient's wrist. The skin felt freezing cold. Not cold like a sick patient. Cold like metal. Dead cold. And then, the eyes opened. I jumped backward violently. The patient stared directly at me. Pale skin stretched tightly across a gaunt face. Clouded eyes. Blue lips. A breathing tube still shoved down his throat. Frozen, like time had stopped 5 years earlier. Old hospital equipment lined the walls. Dust coated everything. An outdated cardiac monitor blinked green beside the bed. Beep. 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 The rhythm echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. A patient lay beneath a white sheet, motionless. My throat tightened. "Sir?" Linda called carefully. No response. The monitor suddenly sped up. Beep, beep, beep. I stepped closer, slowly. The patient's face remained hidden beneath shadows. Then I noticed something horrifying. The IV bag hanging beside the bed looked ancient. Yellowed. Expired years ago. The plastic tubing was brittle. This room wasn't operating. It couldn't be. Linda moved toward the bedside. "Check responsiveness," she whispered automatically. I reached for the patient's wrist. The skin felt freezing cold. Not cold like a sick patient. Cold like metal. Dead cold. And then, the eyes opened. I jumped backward violently. The patient stared directly at me. Pale skin stretched tightly across a gaunt face. Clouded eyes. Blue lips. A breathing tube still shoved down his throat. Frozen, like time had stopped 5 years earlier. Old hospital equipment lined the walls. Dust coated everything. An outdated cardiac monitor blinked green beside the bed. Beep. 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 The rhythm echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. A patient lay beneath a white sheet, motionless. My throat tightened. "Sir?" Linda called carefully. No response. The monitor suddenly sped up. Beep, beep, beep. I stepped closer, slowly. The patient's face remained hidden beneath shadows. Then I noticed something horrifying. The IV bag hanging beside the bed looked ancient. Yellowed. Expired years ago. The plastic tubing was brittle. This room wasn't operating. It couldn't be. Linda moved toward the bedside. "Check responsiveness," she whispered automatically. I reached for the patient's wrist. The skin felt freezing cold. Not cold like a sick patient. Cold like metal. Dead cold. And then, the eyes opened. I jumped backward violently. The patient stared directly at me. Pale skin stretched tightly across a gaunt face. Clouded eyes. Blue lips. A breathing tube still shoved down his throat. The cardiac monitor erupted into rapid alarms. Beep! The patient's mouth twitched, then slowly opened. His voice came out wet and broken. "Why didn't you come?" Linda stumbled backward.
"Oh my God."
The man's head turned toward her with a sickening crack. "You heard the call." The lights exploded. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Linda screamed. I grabbed her arm blindly. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Not ours. Dozens of them. Shuffling around us in the dark. Whispers filled the room from every direction. Overlapping voices. Crying. Praying. Begging. Code blue alarms echoed faintly through the darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam shook violently in my hand. The room was empty. The bed? Gone. Monitor? Gone. No patient. Nothing. Just dust. And old stained walls. Then the flashlight landed on the far corner. Someone stood there. A nurse. Or what used to be one. Her uniform looked decades old. Her face was burned black along one side. She stared at us silently. Then more figures appeared behind her. Patients. Doctors. People in hospital gowns, standing motionless in the darkness. Watching. Linda whispered, "Run." The figures began moving toward us slowly. Not walking. Dragging. Like broken bodies pulled by invisible strings. The nearest patient lifted an IV pole slowly. Its wheels screeched across the floor. Then every monitor in the room exploded with noise at once. "Code blue! Code blue! Code blue!" The voices screamed through hidden speakers. I grabbed Linda and ran. We burst into the hallway, pushing the crash cart wildly ahead of us. Behind us came footsteps. Fast now. Too many footsteps. The hallway lights flickered violently. For one terrifying second, every doorway along the corridor appeared occupied. Faces staring from the darkness. Pale hands reaching outward. Then darkness swallowed them again. We ran harder. The crash cart slammed into walls as we pushed it. Behind us, the intercom crackled alive once more. "Respiratory therapy to room 417. The voice sounded closer now. Almost human. I risked one glance backward and immediately wished I hadn't. At the end of the corridor stood the patient from the bed. Only now he was upright. The breathing tube dangled from his mouth. Blood stained the hospital gown. His body jerked unnaturally as he walked. And behind him, more figures emerged from the shadows. An entire crowd. Silent. Following. The lights went out again. Complete darkness. Linda screamed somewhere beside me. I heard metal crash. Then hands touched my shoulder. Ice cold. I spun wildly. But nobody was there. The emergency lights suddenly flashed back on red. The hallway behind us was empty. Completely empty. No figures. No patient. Nothing. Just silence. Linda grabbed my arm. "Move!" We sprinted back toward the active side of the hospital. The second we crossed through the double fire doors, normal hospital noise returned instantly. Phones ringing, monitors beeping, voices talking. It felt impossible, like we had crossed between two different worlds. We collapsed near the nurse's station, gasping for breath. Staff rushed toward us immediately. "What happened? Why are you pale?" "Where's the crash cart?" I looked behind us. The cart was gone. Linda stared too. We had it. But the hallway doors behind us stood closed quietly. Nothing unusual. Security checked the East Wing immediately. They found nothing. No room 417. No crash cart. No signs anyone had entered. According to security footage, Linda and I never even went down the corridor. The camera showed us leaving the nurse's station, then suddenly reappearing 10 minutes later, terrified and drenched in sweat. Like the footage itself had missing time. Hospital administration blamed exhaustion, stress, overwork. But Linda quit 2 days later. No notice. Just gone. I tried convincing myself it was all some kind of shared hallucination. Until 3 nights later. I was alone in the respiratory office updating patient charts around 2:50 a.m. The storm had returned. Rain slammed against the windows again. Thunder rattled the building. I kept thinking about the patient's voice. Why didn't you come? At exactly 3:03 a.m., my pager vibrated. I looked down. Code blue. Room 417. My blood froze. I went to the nearest desk immediately. No one responded to that page, I snapped. The nurse looked confused.
What page? I showed her my pager. Her face drained of color. Who sent that? I don't know. She checked the system. There's no active code blue. I backed away slowly. Then the intercom clicked. Every head at the station turned upward. Static crackled softly. Then, code blue, room 417. Several nurses heard it this time. One of them crossed herself immediately. Another whispered, "Not again." The overhead lights dimmed. And somewhere far down the east corridor, a monitor began beeping. Slow, steady, waiting. The next morning, I started digging through old hospital records. At first, administration refused access, but one of the older records clerks eventually helped me. Her name was Margaret. She had worked there over 30 years. The moment I mentioned room 417, her hand stopped moving. "You should leave that alone," she whispered. "What happened there?" Margaret looked around carefully before speaking. 5 years ago, during another storm, the East Wing lost power. I listened silently. There was a patient in room 417, recovering from cardiac surgery. What was his name? She hesitated. Daniel Mercer. I wrote it down. What happened to him? The backup systems failed. How? No one knows. She swallowed hard. The monitors went down, phones stopped working, the intercom malfunctioned. A chill crept down my spine. Code blue? Margaret nodded slowly. The patient crashed, but nobody came. I stared at her. How long? 22 minutes. My stomach turned. That's impossible. They never received the alert. But someone must have heard something. Margaret's eyes met mine. Some staff claimed they did. What? They said the code blue announcement sounded delayed, distorted, exactly like ours. One nurse responded, she continued quietly, but she disappeared. I felt my chest tighten. Disappeared? They found her 3 days later wandering outside the hospital barefoot. What did she say? Margaret's voice dropped to almost nothing. She kept repeating the same sentence. What sentence? Margaret looked directly at me. He's still waiting. That night, I should have called in sick. Instead, I returned to work. I don't know why. Part of me wanted answers. Another part wanted proof I wasn't losing my mind. At 2:55 a.m., I stood outside the East Wing doors alone. The hallway beyond looked darker than before. I held a flashlight tightly in one hand. In the other was an old paper file I'd stolen from records. The intercom activated. Code blue, room 417. I closed my eyes. The voice sounded clearer this time. Closer. Almost desperate. I stepped into the corridor. Immediately the temperature dropped. My flashlight flickered weakly. The deeper I walked, the more distorted the hallway became. Walls stained darker, paint peeling, old equipment appearing where none should have existed, like the past bleeding through reality. Then I saw the room again. Door open, waiting. This time, I entered alone. The room looked exactly as before, except the patient was awake. Daniel Mercer stared directly at me from the bed. His chest barely moved. The breathing tube still protruded from his mouth. The monitor beeped weakly beside him. Beep, beep, beep. I forced myself closer. "You're dead," I whispered. His cracked lips moved slowly. "Not yet." The monitor suddenly dropped. Beep, beep, flatline. The room filled with one long, continuous tone. Daniel's eyes widened in terror.
And suddenly I understood. He wasn't haunting the hospital out of anger. He was trapped in the moment nobody came, reliving it endlessly.
Waiting for help that never arrived, I stepped toward the bedside. "What do you want me to do?" His trembling hand lifted slightly, toward the code blue button beside the bed. My breath caught. 5 years earlier, he pressed the button, but nobody answered. Slowly, I reached out and pressed it. The second I did, the room exploded with sound. Intercoms activated everywhere at once. Footsteps thundered through the hallway. Voices shouted outside. Real voices. Doctors, nurses, crash carts rattling closer. Daniel looked toward the doorway. Tears filled his clouded eyes. Then his face softened. For the first time, the fear disappeared. The monitor tone stopped. Silence filled the room. And then, the lights came back. Bright. Normal. I blinked hard. The room was gone. I stood alone in an empty storage space covered in dust. No bed, no monitor, no patient. Just silence. The next morning, hospital maintenance sealed the East Corridor permanently. No explanation given. No reports filed. But something changed afterward. The strange pages stopped. The intercom never announced room 417 again. And the cold feeling in that hallway disappeared. A month later, I checked the hospital system logs one final time. Buried deep in archived records was an entry. Code blue response, room 417. Time, 3:03 a.m. Status, responded. 5 years late, but answered. And sometimes, during storms, I still think about Daniel Mercer. About how terrifying it must be to die believing nobody is coming. Because hospitals are strange places. People think death happens all at once, like flipping off a light switch. But after working nights long enough, I'm not sure that's true anymore. Sometimes I think certain moments linger. Pain, fear, regret. Like echoes trapped inside walls, waiting